Okay, so just welcome for those joining online. We're just chatting through the opportunity that we have with Curiosity in Action in terms of applying to be part of the action research for youth workers in Scotland, as well as the researchers who are involved in STFC, Science, Technology and Facilities Council based research. So this opportunity really built out these kind of key questions that developed through some of our programs with Science Ceilidh, Curiosity, which was mentioned with Welcome and BBC Children Need and our New Scots Connect program. And so some of the questions that we were kind of looking at and what some of the issues that we were finding when we were working with youth workers, particularly those who didn't necessarily have backgrounds in STEM as well, in particular, is what is that role that STEM can play in making a difference to young people, especially those who are underrepresented and currently excluded very often as a tool for youth work. And how can youth workers and STFC scientists be supported to bring their respective expertise to trial, develop tools and build evidence together? This one's really important to us because we've been involved in youth work for a very long time. And I think there's something about that came up in our previous conversations around, you know, the confidence, and very often it feels like unless you're trained as a scientist, then we don't do STEM. And actually, I think for anyone who knows youth work, actually a lot of activities are curiosity-based, they're problem-based, and actually already have a lot of the key ingredients around what STEM can be. And so it felt really important to us to really honour that, and particularly see youth workers as what they are, which are experts of working and building trust with young people. And so we wanted to design a programme that would acknowledge that, as well as bringing the expertise and enthusiasm for science that the scientists can bring as well. And I suppose the wider question is thinking about, well, how can we build an evidence base around this? And that, again, building off the work that already is happening, very much so, and taking this action research approach to that, but also thinking about how do we widen and kind of not just those who are already interested in STEM, but actually make this much more of a normalized approach of working. And I think broadening the take up with community learning and development practitioners, STEM engagement scientists, as well as wider stakeholders. And I think that works in different ways. I think, for example, for scientists, very often the most common way of working perhaps is working in kind of with schools or with science festivals, developing a workshop, which tends to be kind of focused a bit more, and this is a generalization, around learning outcomes, or kind of this is my script, as it were, and this is what I'm going to talk about. Whereas youth work tends to be much more focused on the relationship, much more about being reactive and obviously being led by young people and what young people need. And you can come with a plan, and even if it's a plan that they come up with the week before, and actually you would have to change it because things change. And so there's something about this kind of how can scientists learn from a community learning, development, community-based or youth work approach? And similarly, how can youth workers work in partnership with scientists to kind of give them confidence about exploring science as a tool, just like sports and arts in their work, to support the kind of classic youth work outcomes of resilience, confidence, and things like that. And so this program developed as a basis of that, and we are already in the network element of it. That's why we have the community practice. As part of it, we're hopefully developing some the action research itself, and I'll break down what that means. We'll be working with hopefully 10 youth workers over the 2 years in much more depth, so hopefully 5 in year 1, and that's what we're currently recruiting for. And we'll also be pairing them with the scientists and residents, and that's up to 14 over the 2 years as well, so hopefully 7 in the first year. And again, the reason the numbers are different, we might expect some groups to have potentially up to 2 scientists and residents as well to work as together in tandem. What we hope is that there will be co-delivering activities and developing and kind of experimenting with what works in a youth work setting and tailoring existing resources, and again acknowledging that there's lots of resources out there for STEM, but really putting it into that youth work lens and that impact lens around social outcomes in particular. And so that we're co-delivering over the 7-8 months, and then from that we'll be supporting from our end and from our steering group to think about how we develop that into resources. So we call them meta resources because what we're trying to avoid is making just new activity resources, but putting that insight, that learning, real kind of applied insight that we can get as part of the action research in context, rather than just coming up with another activity plan for, you know, spaghetti and marshmallow too. So really focusing on the kind of application and the outcomes that it can support, and hopefully also co-writing a academic paper together as well as to kind of build on the evidence base together. And through that, we'll also be developing free training. So even if you're not involved or you're not an STFC scientist specifically, from next year, we'll be developing training sessions that'll be free, that are funded through this program already to the wider sectors to kind of share that learning, to develop these, use the resources, and again, build that confidence. Very briefly on action research, it's often called different things. Participatory action research, it's well known within kind of more education settings very often, but essentially it's learning and work, research in practice. So it's philosophy and methodology research. It's seeking transformational change by taking action, doing the research, trialing it together, and then reflecting and iterating again. And so what that means in practice for the cohort that we're hoping to support is we'll be working together to kind of formulate some questions with the cohort. So what outcomes, what questions should we explore around the core themes that we introduced? Based on those questions, we'll be designing the activities. So what are the activities we could do? What's appropriate? What would the young people like to explore? And obviously, as the action research develops, bringing the young people more and more through that process. And then through that, then delivering between the youth work and the scientists and residents, seeing how it works in practice, working with the young people to capture the impact it's making, and then coming back together as a group to kind of reflect on that, and hopefully through that be able to kind of iterate and think about the next cycle. So how does that answer the questions? What didn't work? How can we formulate as a group new questions, and then use that to then inspire the next set of actions and activities together. The other important part of action research is that everyone is equal in that space. And so, like I was saying beforehand, the youth worker and the STFC scientists, as well as ourselves as partners and the steering groups, are action researchers together. So it's not the youth workers being researched on. We very much want the youth workers to be an active participant and an active researcher in this work to bring their professional insight into this work. And as the program develops, more and more of the young people to be involved in that process as well. And so if you imagine that cycle, what that will work in practice is this, what we're recruiting for at the moment will hopefully launch. We'll be able to let the successful youth groups know, the 5 that will and workers know. And then in October, we'll be able to bring everyone together. We'll be matching them with the scientists before that, and I'll talk a wee bit about that a little bit later. And then, so we'll come together in person in October to kind of formulate the questions, spend a day together to kind of explore that, capture, think about how we're going to evaluate impact. Then everyone will go back to the youth groups, they'll co-deliver in November, and then we come back online in December to reflect, so do the action research meeting to reiterate, and that will generate the plan for the January process as well. I put it in timeline, but we've also got a kind of community to practice in January, so hopefully we'll be in a position to be able to share with the wider community what we've learned so far. And then in March, we'll be able to come back together to kind of do that final set of ideas and iteration. The co-delivery will be in April, and then we'll kind of April, May, and then we've got a final action research meeting in June with this current cohort. And then we'll start recruiting for the next 5 youth workers that we'll be working with, hopefully taking and very much building on the learning from the first year. And we very much hope there'll be opportunities and have planned for opportunities for the first cohort to be involved in supporting the second group as well. So there's opportunities to join the meetings, to be involved directly in the training and support as well. And so in terms of what we hope the impact is really developing a cohort of youth workers and researchers who are enabled to be STEM influencers, obviously using STFC science, particularly the science of the very big and very small, so space, astronomy, nanotechnology, as inspiration. Obviously, we're hoping to support the young people themselves, coming from underrepresented areas to have support STEM capital, but the wider confidence and resilience to develop the evidence base and develop this wider network and this kind of coalition of people who are excited about this way of working and making this much more of a mainstream tool, as it were. And the resources, we've got some from our existing projects that we'll be developing, and you can see not only is it about the content, but there's the practitioner tips that have come through the reflective process. And there's also the practitioner reflections about how it's impacted on the young people's teamwork, the communication skills, for example. And so really centering the kind of social and youth work impact in the STEM activity, as opposed to maybe more of the kind of more formal learning activities as well. And so this is one that we've developed that's already linked that we can share, but hopefully we'll be developing much more like this. So the opportunity overall, if you're a youth worker in Scotland, you'll be opportunities paired with a scientist in residence. You'll be co-delivering creative STEM field themes activities. And I should also make that really clear, because it came up in a few other conversations, is, for us, the interdisciplinary nature of STEM is kind of implicit. And so, it's STEM within a creative cultural context, not just STEM. It doesn't have to be STEM formally. And that's very much what we'll be working with the youth groups and the youth workers to kind of co-develop. You obviously be part of the action research, so developing this evidence together and collectively, be part of, as an author on the publications and be acknowledged as such. Of course, there's the wider opportunities to develop as a cohort, to build these networks and work with other youth workers. And really acknowledging, again, funding came up earlier, one of the biggest barriers in this is people's time. And so whilst not by any stretch necessarily going to be a full commitment of your time, at least being able to provide for the youth workers a contribution of £2,000 to support your time commitment alongside any other expenses. So any travel expenses to come in person, any delivery cost, kind of materials, for example, that's not within the £2,000 as well. That's covered separately, and we'll be working with you to contract how that will work if you're successful. But again, acknowledging that, making sure that your time is covered as an action researcher. Who we look working for? So if you're a youth worker or working in community learning development settings, already working with a youth group based in Scotland. So because we're really keen to make sure that we're working with youth group workers who already have a relationship with young people as well, rather than starting from scratch, that is quite important. But again, if you've got any questions on that, happy to chat through. And if you're obviously interested in partnering for scientists and residents to be involved in this evidence building, this action research between October 2023 and June 2024. So it is quite an involved process. That's one of the reasons why we want to support people's time. So I wouldn't think of it as just, obviously there is training and support, but that kind of active participation, having the capacity for that, and appreciate that it's not always easy to predict. But we're really hoping that this is a collaborative partnership opportunity. We're really particularly interested in hearing from youth workers who are working with groups who are underrepresented in STEM, and that can be defined in lots of different ways. One of the focus points includes those who are disadvantaged socioeconomically, and one of the ways of looking at that is through the Scottish Multiple Index of Deprivation, for example, and we'd be prioritising applications and groups who are working with those in the top 40%. But we also appreciate that's quite a rough tool, and of course we wouldn't want to have any individual data, so it's more about just thinking about who you're serving and what postcodes you might be serving. But it could also be defined around rurality, any of the protected characteristics, for example. And so, yeah, we're just looking for a kind of a wide range, because I think that will enrich the research and the diversity of learning that we can have as a cohort around our question. We're also, just to be very clear, explicitly looking for both youth workers who have not used STEM before in their work. So this could be newer, at least explicitly STEM in their work, as well as those who may have already tried this, or this is something that they're already really passionate about. And again, thinking about that balance of what could we learn from the 5 youth workers and scientists and residents, and having a diverse range of experiences. So just to be very clear, if you've not worked with STEM before, but this is intriguing to you, we'd absolutely be very keen to support you in this process, as well as those who have. And what does that working together with the scientists and residents look like? It really will depend. The whole point of action research is you'll decide this together, and we'll be pairing each youth group with the scientists and residents, and with that there'll be kind of some one-on-one support to really help shape that. So to be very clear, you don't need to have an idea of what that looks like at the moment. You do not need to have any experience or any connections with the scientists at the moment. Of course, if you do have any ideas, that's helpful to know. But we really hope that this is something we can develop together as part of the action research to make sure it's tailored towards your group, because every youth group is going to be different. So we don't anticipate this to be a one size fits all. And again, part of the action research meetings, they're coming together every other month, and one-on-one support as well, is to kind of just help develop that with you as well. So there's plenty of time to develop it. But I think at this stage, we just want to know if that's something interesting to you, that's obviously interesting to your youth group, and why you might be interested in that, but we don't need specifics of how that might look. And then in terms of the timeline, of course, today we're having a wee chat about this, or this might be a recording. The deadline for the application, we try to make it as light touch as possible. Again, appreciating, we're more interested in who you are and why you might be enthusiastic rather than very specific ideas. And capacity is low as we come into summer as well. So it is quite light touch. Hopefully we can provide support for the application. I'll share the questions very shortly, but the deadline is the 30th of June at 5 p.m. We're hoping to be able to go through a kind of decision-making process and decide on a balanced portfolio for the 5 and let everyone know by the end of July, early August time. Hopefully, once everyone's back from the summer properly, we'll have a chance to one-on-one conversation to understand what you might need, who might be the right scientist, and we'll be doing a call out for scientists even from now. If you're an STFC researcher, you're very welcome to express your interest to be matched, and we'll also be pushing this further once we know which 5 youth groups we'll be working with, where they're based, what they're looking for, and we'll be pushing that in September as well. So there's plenty of time for the matching process to make sure that it's a good fit, and then hopefully by the kind of latter end of October, for our first in-person action research meeting, you'll have that partnership in place. We'll have the contracts all formalized, and we'll start this process together to kind of develop the collective questions, the training, and the delivery as well. And of course, these dates will be decided with the cohort as well. Cool. Just finally, in terms of the application, just to give you a sense of hopefully how light touch it is, relatively speaking, we're really just asking 5 questions. So who are you and the young people that you're working with? What excites you about, and the young people potentially about working with a scientist in residence? Again, no experience in working with scientists is necessary, but of course, hopefully you'd be interested in it. What about the action research element? So that's in particular, the kind of evidence building, the collaborative work, the kind of a little bit more of the reflection process rather than just focusing on the delivery elements of the work. Why is that interesting to you? If you do have any experience of STEM, that's useful for us to know. If you don't, also totally grand. And if there's any support within this process, and that could be additional support needs, either for yourself or the youth group that you're working for. And of course, we have budget to make sure that this is an accessible process. But if there's any other support that you would find useful, or you've got any reflections, you're very welcome to indicate that on the application form. And then for the STFC researchers, as an expression of interest, similar very questions. So who are you? What is the research that you're involved in? We're particularly looking for STFC researchers probably at the PhD level and above. If there's any queries about that, please do let us know. Why might you be interested in working with the youth group and the action research? Have you worked with young people before? And again, no experience is necessary, but again, useful for us to know. And similarly, if there's any particular support that you might find useful through this process. You can apply, there's a Google form, there's also a Word document which you might want to use to plan beforehand, or you could submit the Word document directly. You are welcome to do a video response if you would find that useful, particularly for the question of why might the young people be interested in working with the scientists. You're very welcome to get quotes or use video, but similarly, there's no need to do that as well. So whatever is most useful. If it's useful to jump on a phone call and Zoom call to chat through, myself and Katie would be very happy to chat to you about that as a youth group. But if there's anything else we can make this accessible to apply, do let us know as well.